It was a day like any other, or so it seemed, until a simple exchange set off a chain of events that would change everything. In a quiet office building, one woman walked in, expecting the same routine as always. But by the end of the day, her life, her career, and her entire world would be transformed in a way no one could have ever predicted. This is a story about power, revenge, and the unlikeliest of comebacks. Her name was Aisha, an ambitious, hard-working woman who had spent years climbing the corporate ladder. She was no stranger to challenges. Aisha had always kept her head down, focused on the work in front of her, and ignored the subtle whispers of doubt and discrimination that sometimes followed her. But on this day, something changed. The tension in the office was palpable, and it had nothing to do with deadlines or the latest project. It was the sudden, unexpected shift in the dynamics of the workplace, a shift that would start with a single, careless remark from a colleague. Gregory was one of the senior employees in the office. He was known for his sharp tongue and quick wit. However, on this particular day, his words would go beyond casual sarcasm. He had been overheard making a comment, an insulting one, about Aisha. To most, it might have seemed like a joke, a passing comment that could be shrugged off. But to Aisha, it was the final straw. It wasn't just about the words he used. It was the years of disrespect, the underestimation, and the quiet moments of bias that she had silently endured. The thing about Aisha was that she had always been the bigger person. She smiled through the microaggressions, worked harder than anyone, and waited for the day when she would be recognized for her efforts. But today, something snapped inside her. For the first time, she wasn't going to let it slide. Instead of walking away with her head down, Aisha decided to take control in a way no one expected. She wasn't going to let Gregory get away with this. But how could she, a regular employee, stand up to someone with more years in the company? How could she prove to him, and to herself, that she deserved to be treated with the same respect as anyone else in that office? The answer came to her the next morning. The next day, Aisha walked into the office, her mind made up. She wasn't there for small talk, and she wasn't there for another day of enduring disrespect. She was there to make a statement. But no one could have predicted just how dramatic that statement would be. When Aisha entered the office, she wasn't just another employee. She wasn't the woman who had once quietly accepted the lower rung of the corporate ladder. No, today she was someone else entirely, a force to be reckoned with. As the office buzzed with its usual chatter, Aisha walked into the conference room, where Gregory and the other senior members gathered for a routine meeting. They didn't even notice her at first, but when they did, their faces quickly fell. Gregory, in particular, seemed taken aback. There she was, standing confidently, holding a stack of papers that held the official announcement of a new position. A position that she, Aisha, had just been promoted to. But that wasn't all. The promotion wasn't just to any role. It was the one Gregory had always seen himself in, the one he believed was rightfully his. It was her moment of triumph, but the question lingered in the air. How far had this new power come for Aisha, and what was she going to do with it now? And Gregory? He didn't know whether to be angry, embarrassed, or simply shocked. His mind was racing as he tried to process what was happening. One thing was clear. Aisha wasn't just here to take over her new role, she was here to show him, and everyone, that she had more power than they'd ever given her credit for. The tables had turned, and Aisha wasn't going to let anyone forget it. But as the tension hung thick in the room, Aisha took her seat at the head of the table. There was no smile on her face, no smug look of satisfaction, just calm, steady confidence. Gregory's expression flickered with uncertainty. The others in the room tried to hide their surprise, but it was clear that nothing would be the same again. What would happen next? How would Aisha navigate her new role, with all the eyes watching her, waiting to see if she could truly lead? And what would Gregory do now that the tables had turned completely? Stay tuned, because this is only the beginning of an incredible story of power, redemption, and the quiet strength that can change everything in an instant. The office was silent, the kind of silence that only comes when something truly unexpected has just unfolded. Aisha sat at the head of the table, her back straight, her eyes focused but calm. The tension in the room was palpable. Gregory, usually quick to fill the space with his loud comments and brash humor, was now completely still, his face flushed with confusion and something else, something deeper. He wasn't the only one struggling to process what was happening. The other employees exchanged glances, some of them unsure of whether they should speak, others simply too stunned to do anything but stare. Aisha, for the first time in what felt like years, felt in control. She could feel the weight of the moment, the weight of the power she had just been handed. But with that power came responsibility, and she knew she couldn't afford to let anyone see how much she was still processing all of this. She had worked too hard to get here. She had fought too many quiet battles to let a single moment of victory pass without fully embracing it. But the victory felt bittersweet. She had earned her place, yes, but she couldn't ignore the sting of how she had gotten there. The incident with Gregory was not an isolated moment. For years, Aisha had put up with the kind of subtle disrespect that often went unnoticed by those around her. It was the kind of thing that no one talked about, and for a long time, Aisha had kept her head down, trying to rise above it. She had always believed that her hard work would eventually speak louder than the whispers and the offhand remarks. But this time, the insult had cut too deep. This time, it had been the final push. Gregory had always been the office's loudest personality, the one who commanded attention the second he walked in. He was the kind of person who thought his position in the company gave him a free pass to make jokes at others' expense, to belittle those he considered beneath him. And for too long, Aisha had swallowed his words and let them roll off her back, even as she silently resented the way he treated her. But after that comment, the one that slipped past his lips with barely a second thought, something shifted inside her. She realized that she didn't have to take it anymore. She didn't have to smile politely or pretend that his words didn't matter. Her decision had been made in the quiet of her own thoughts, long before she even walked into that office the next morning. She had put in the hours, stayed late, taken on the extra tasks, and always done her best to deliver results. And now, with a single signature on a piece of paper, she was no longer the woman Gregory could walk over. She was his boss. As the meeting continued, Aisha could feel the eyes on her. She wasn't just in a new position, she was under a microscope. Everyone was watching her, waiting to see how she would handle this sudden shift in power. Gregory, to his credit, kept his cool for a while, but Aisha could tell that inside, he was fuming. He had spent years thinking that he was the next in line for this promotion, the one who deserved it because of his experience, his connections, and the fact that he was the loudest voice in the room. But Aisha knew better than anyone that experience didn't always equate to ability, and loudness didn't always mean leadership. Gregory was seething, but he was trying hard not to let it show. His eyes flicked from Aisha to the others in the room, seeking support or maybe just some sign that he wasn't entirely alone in his disbelief. No one said anything. The silence hung heavy, each passing second a reminder of the shift in the balance of power. Aisha wasn't about to let him make this awkward. She had a job to do, and that job was to make sure this transition went smoothly, at least on the surface. She wasn't there to gloat, though part of her wanted to. She wasn't there to make Gregory's life miserable, though she wasn't going to pretend the thought didn't cross her mind. No, she was there to lead, to show the office that the days of letting disrespect slide were over. She had earned this spot, and she wasn't going to let anyone forget it. But as the meeting wore on, Aisha couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in the back of her mind. What was Gregory going to do now? She knew how he operated. He wasn't someone who took a slight like this lightly. He wouldn't just accept this turn of events and quietly fade into the background. No, Gregory would fight. And when Gregory fought, things often got ugly. She glanced at him again. He was staring at the conference table now, his fingers tapping against the surface nervously, his jaw clenched. She knew he was working through his options, weighing whether to challenge her right there in front of everyone or bide his time and find a way to undermine her later. It was the latter that worried Aisha. Gregory wasn't the type to publicly confront someone unless he felt he had no other choice. But he was a master of manipulation. He could easily plant seeds of doubt, create subtle conflicts, and make Aisha's life difficult in ways that no one would see coming. As the meeting ended and everyone began to filter out of the room, Aisha lingered behind, her eyes following Gregory as he stood up. He didn't look at her, but she could feel his gaze burning into her back as he walked past. She knew he wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. Aisha wasn't one to back down easily, but this was a battle that was only just beginning. She couldn't afford to let her guard down. She had her promotion, but that didn't mean she had won the war. Not by a long shot. She sat in the empty conference room for a moment, the weight of everything settling on her shoulders. The power, the responsibility, the uncertainty. There was no going back now. She had made her move, and now she had to make sure she was ready for whatever Gregory, or anyone else in the office, would throw her way. Her phone buzzed on the table, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her best friend, Lena. Aisha had confided in Lena about everything, about the struggles, the insults, and the hope that one day, she would be able to stand up for herself. The message read, I know today's the big day. You've got this, girl. They'll see your worth now. Aisha smiled to herself, reading the words that felt like a lifeline. It was true. She had earned this moment. But as her phone buzzed again, this time with an email notification, she couldn't shake the feeling that the real challenge was only just beginning. The days that followed Aisha's promotion were nothing short of surreal. Each morning she walked into the office, there was an invisible weight that settled on her shoulders, heavier than any deadline or project brief. The usual hum of the office, the casual conversations, the buzz of phones ringing, all of it seemed to be filtered through a lens of expectation and scrutiny. She wasn't just any employee anymore. She was the one who had risen to the top, quickly, unexpectedly, and with a story that everyone would talk about for months to come. Aisha could feel the eyes on her constantly. She'd always been aware of the quiet judgments that came with being one of the few black women in the office, but now the spotlight was inescapable. People watched her more closely, listened a little harder, perhaps hoping to see if she would falter. After all, Gregory wasn't the only one who had assumed that position was his. There were whispers about who deserved the promotion, who had put in more time, who had worked harder, and Aisha knew that some of those whispers were about her. She had worked for this, but in a way, her success felt like a challenge to others' deeply held beliefs about who belonged in charge. And yet, despite the unease, there was something undeniably exhilarating about the power she now held. Aisha couldn't deny the rush of walking into meetings, knowing that everyone in the room had to answer to her now. It wasn't just a seat at the table anymore, it was the seat. She had earned it, and she wasn't about to let anyone forget it. But there was always the undercurrent of tension. Even in her interactions with colleagues who smiled and congratulated her, there was a sense of hesitation, like they were waiting for her to prove herself, to somehow justify her position. The subtle microaggressions didn't disappear with her promotion. In fact, they seemed to take on a new form. Some were even more insidious now, disguised behind polite smiles and backhanded compliments. You really surprised us with that promotion, someone would say, and Aisha could hear the judgment hidden beneath the surface. But it was Gregory who loomed over her thoughts the most. He hadn't said a word to her since the day of the meeting. He had kept his distance, a careful distance that seemed to suggest he was plotting something that might make her regret her decision to take this role. She'd been expecting some kind of confrontation, but Gregory was far too clever for that. He didn't act out in the open. Instead, he had begun to use his experience and connections to quietly undermine her in ways she hadn't anticipated. It started with small things. He'd send passive-aggressive emails, carbon-copied to everyone on the team, questioning her decisions or suggesting alternate strategies that subtly cast doubt on her judgment. He'd forget to update her on crucial information or schedules, putting her in awkward positions in front of clients or other departments. At first, Aisha tried to brush it off, telling herself that he was just taking time to adjust to the new dynamic. But as the days turned into weeks, the subtle sabotage became harder to ignore. She began to realize that Gregory wasn't going to play fair. He was going to make her work for every ounce of respect. One afternoon, after another tense meeting where Gregory had once again tried to steer the conversation away from her ideas, Aisha retreated to her office. She sat behind her desk, staring out the window at the city skyline, her fingers tapping restlessly on the surface. She had always prided herself on being calm under pressure, on handling conflict with grace. But Gregory's actions were making that harder to do. The weight of the situation was starting to feel suffocating. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Lena. I can tell something's off. Talk to me. You're not letting him get to you, are you? Aisha didn't respond immediately. She wasn't sure how to explain what she was feeling. The loneliness of leadership was something she hadn't expected. There was no one she could really confide in at work. The office, once a place of camaraderie, had started to feel like a battlefield. Every decision she made, every word she spoke, was scrutinized. No matter how much she proved herself, there was always someone, usually Gregory, waiting for her to slip up. But Aisha wasn't about to let him see that he had rattled her. She had come too far, worked too hard, to let anyone take that from her. She picked up the phone and began typing a response. Asterisk, I'm not backing down. But it's hard. I never imagined how hard it would be. Her fingers paused over the keys, as if the simple act of acknowledging the struggle made it feel more real. There was no magic formula for leadership. There was no roadmap that told her exactly what to do when you inherited an office full of people who were either jealous, resentful, or downright eager to see you fail. As she hit send, there was a knock at her office door. She looked up to see Amy, one of the junior managers, standing hesitantly in the doorway. Amy had been with the company for only a few years, but she had quickly become one of Aisha's few allies. She had been one of the first to congratulate Aisha when the promotion was announced, and her support had been unwavering ever since. Can I talk to you for a second? Amy asked, her voice cautious. Of course, Aisha said, straightening up in her chair. Come in. Amy stepped inside, closing the door gently behind her. She walked over to Aisha's desk and stood for a moment, looking down at her hands. Aisha could tell she was struggling with something. Is everything okay? Aisha asked. Amy hesitated, clearly weighing her words. It's Gregory. He's been saying things about you. Behind your back. Aisha's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her face neutral. She had expected this, but hearing it out loud made it feel more real. What kind of things? She asked. Nothing that can be traced back to him, but there are rumors. He's been telling people that you don't have the experience to lead. That you were given the job because they needed a diverse face in charge. You know, that kind of thing. Aisha felt a pang in her chest, the words stinging more than they should have. She had always known that her race played a role in how people perceived her, how they judged her worth. But here, Gregory used it as ammunition in an attempt to discredit her was a different level of cruelty. He's trying to make you look unqualified, Amy continued. And I just wanted you to know. People are talking. Aisha took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay composed. Thank you for telling me, she said, her voice steady. I'll handle it. Amy nodded, but there was an unease in her eyes. She clearly didn't think that Aisha could handle it alone. As Amy left the room, Aisha leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. This wasn't just about a few backhanded comments anymore. Gregory was waging a war, and it wasn't going to end unless she made a stand. One that went beyond her role in the office and into the realm of true leadership. But what would that stand look like? How could she fight back against someone who knew how to play the game better than anyone? For the first time in a long time, Aisha didn't know the answer. But she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going down without a fight. The days following Amy's warning were some of the hardest Aisha had ever faced. The whispers about her lack of experience and supposed diversity higher status didn't just linger, they grew louder, more frequent. It seemed like every corner of the office was buzzing with the kind of rumors she had once been able to ignore. But now, with the weight of leadership on her shoulders, they felt like an insurmountable obstacle. The more she tried to focus on her work, the more she felt the tension, as if her every move was being watched, judged, and questioned. The sabotage from Gregory had escalated. He had stopped being subtle, no longer sending passive-aggressive emails or undermining her in small ways. Now, it was more direct. He would openly challenge her decisions in meetings, question her leadership in front of clients, and even mock her in casual conversations when they were both in the break room. The worst part was that no one in the office seemed willing to speak up. Aisha was alone in this fight. The once vibrant energy she had felt stepping into her new role had been replaced with a suffocating pressure. It was as if every moment she spent trying to prove herself only led to more doubts, more suspicion from those around her. It wasn't just Gregory's whispers anymore. It was the looks from her colleagues, the way they spoke to her with a false politeness, like they were waiting for her to slip up. Aisha knew she couldn't keep letting him get away with this. But confronting Gregory wasn't going to be easy. He had spent years building alliances, weaving his way into the fabric of the office, and now he was using those connections to turn people against her. He'd taken advantage of their insecurities, their doubts, and twisted them to create a narrative that made her seem unfit for the job. Late one evening, after another exhausting day, Aisha sat at her desk, the office quiet except for the hum of her computer and the occasional sound of typing from the cubicles outside. She stared at the calendar on her screen, her mind racing. There was a big presentation scheduled for the following week, one that would determine the future of a key project she had been working on for months. It was her chance to prove herself once and for all, to show that she had what it took to lead. But as the days ticked down, the pressure only mounted. She had to get it right. There was no room for error. Suddenly, a soft knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. She glanced up to see Lena standing in the doorway, her face an unreadable mask. "You okay?" Lena asked, her voice a mix of concern and curiosity. Aisha gave a small, forced smile. "Yeah, just thinking about the presentation coming up." Lena stepped inside and closed the door behind her, walking over to the chair opposite Aisha's desk. "You're gonna crush it. You always do." Aisha nodded, but even Lena's words didn't bring the comfort they once had. It wasn't just about this presentation anymore. It was about everything, the way her entire career had become a battleground, and how one wrong move could send everything crashing down. She had fought so hard to get here, but the weight of expectation and the fear of failure were beginning to feel unbearable. Lena must have seen the doubt in her eyes because she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Look, I know you're trying to hold it together, but you can't keep reading this alone. Gregory's playing dirty, and everyone knows it. It's only a matter of time before it blows up in his face." Aisha shook her head. "I can't afford to make it personal. If I go after him, it'll only give people more ammunition to question my leadership. I need to keep my focus on the job, on the work, not on him." Lena gave her a pointed look, crossing her arms. "That's exactly what he wants you to do. He's counting on you playing nice while he undermines you at every turn. You need to stand up to him, Aisha. If you let him keep pushing you around, you'll never get the respect you deserve." Aisha's heart raced. She knew Lena was right, but the stakes were so high. If she lost control now, if she let her anger show, it would be the final nail in the coffin. She had to find a way to fight back, but it couldn't be in the way Gregory expected. She had to outsmart him. Over the next few days, Aisha started to play the game differently. Instead of responding to Gregory's provocations with direct confrontation, she started to use his own tactics against him. She quietly began to gather support from other employees, speaking to them individually, gaining their trust, and letting them know she was aware of the rumors swirling about her. She knew that the key to winning this battle wasn't just proving her competence, it was about shifting the office's perception. She had to make it clear that Gregory's tactics were the real problem, not her leadership. But Gregory wasn't an easy opponent to outmaneuver. Every time Aisha thought she had gained ground, he would do something to push her back. He was more subtle now, more calculated, and he knew how to play the political game better than anyone. He started to turn the tables on her. The rumors she had been hearing about her qualifications? He had spread them even further, casting doubt on her ability to lead a team. The whispers in the hallways weren't about her anymore. They were about whether she was the right person for the role at all. The tension between them had reached a boiling point, and Aisha could feel it every time they crossed paths. In meetings, the air seemed to crackle with unspoken hostility. In private moments, Gregory would cast her a sly, knowing glance, as if daring her to make a mistake. Every step Aisha took was shadowed by the specter of his sabotage. The constant pressure to prove herself was wearing her down, and the cracks were beginning to show. She felt like she was walking on a razor's edge, and one misstep could bring it all crashing down. The final confrontation loomed. The presentation was fast approaching, and with it, the moment when everything, her career, her reputation, and her ability to lead, would be put to the ultimate test. Gregory had made it clear that he was waiting for her to fail. He was determined to take her down, and the only thing Aisha could do now was keep pushing forward, even as the ground beneath her seemed to shift with every passing moment. She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep going like this. But there was one thing she knew for certain: she couldn't back down now. Not when she had come this far, not when everything she had worked for was hanging in the balance. The next few days would decide it all. The day of the presentation arrived, and Aisha's nerves were on edge. She had prepared for weeks, rehearsing her pitch over and over in the quiet of her office, fine-tuning every detail. This was her moment, the one she had been waiting for since her promotion. The project she was about to present would set the tone for her future at the company. It wasn't just a business deal. It was a test of her leadership, her competence, and her ability to overcome everything Gregory had thrown at her. As the meeting began, Aisha felt the familiar weight of all eyes on her. The room was filled with senior managers, colleagues, and even a few clients, all waiting to hear her presentation. She stood at the front of the room, her laptop open, the slides ready to display. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart, and began. But halfway through her presentation, something unexpected happened. Her slides suddenly froze. The screen flickered, then went completely blank. Aisha's stomach dropped. She clicked the mouse furiously, trying to get it to work, but the system had completely crashed. The room, which had been so focused on her moments before, fell into an uncomfortable silence. Gregory's voice cut through the stillness. "Seems like someone's not quite ready," he said, a thin smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. His words dripped with a mix of mockery and thinly veiled satisfaction. "This is what happens when you rush to the top without knowing the ropes." Aisha's face flushed, and for a moment, the entire room seemed to close in around her. She tried to remain calm, her hands shaking slightly as she attempted to troubleshoot the issue. But inside, her mind was racing. Could this be another one of Gregory's schemes? She had double-checked everything the night before. There was no way the system should have crashed like this. For a brief second, she met Gregory's eyes across the room. His gaze was cool and unreadable, but there was something in the way he was watching her that made her stomach churn. It wasn't just a coincidence. This felt deliberate. "I'm sorry about the technical difficulties," Aisha said, trying to regain her composure. "Please give me a moment to fix this." But the damage was done. The doubts had already started to seep into the minds of the people in the room. Aisha could see it in their eyes, the skepticism, the questioning glances exchanged between her colleagues. It was as if she had already lost the moment. Even if she could fix the glitch and continue, it wouldn't be the same. She glanced over at Lena, who was seated near the back, her face tight with concern. Lena knew this wasn't just a simple technical issue. She'd seen how hard Aisha had worked on this presentation, and she knew something wasn't right. Aisha forced herself to focus, determined not to let the situation spiral further. She excused herself from the room, saying she needed a few minutes to sort things out. As she stepped into the hallway, her mind raced. Was it possible Gregory had orchestrated this? He had the technical expertise, the connections, the ability to manipulate the systems. He could have planted a bug, sabotaged the presentation remotely without anyone noticing. Aisha's heart pounded. She couldn't afford to make accusations without proof, but the pieces were beginning to fall into place. She dialed Lena's number and walked briskly down the hall. "Aisha?" Lena answered, her voice tight with worry. "Lena, I think Gregory sabotaged the presentation," Aisha said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's too much of a coincidence. He knew I was under pressure, and now the whole room is looking at me like I'm incompetent." Lena's silence spoke volumes. "I knew something was off," she said finally. "Listen, we need to figure this out. You can't let him get away with this." Aisha felt a surge of determination. She had worked too hard, fought too much, to let Gregory destroy everything she had built. But how could she prove it? "I'm going to check the system logs," Aisha said. "I'll see if I can find any trace of what happened." After a tense few minutes, Aisha was back in her office, scanning through the system logs on her computer. She could feel her heart in her throat as she searched for any sign of tampering. And then she found it. There, in the logs, was a timestamp, just minutes before her presentation, showing an unauthorized access to the system. Someone had logged in remotely and manipulated the software. The evidence was right in front of her. Aisha's pulse quickened. She had what she needed. But the implications were huge. This wasn't just a technical malfunction. This was sabotage. And Gregory was behind it. Her mind raced as she pieced together the timeline. The sabotage, the rumors, the whisper campaigns, it was all starting to make sense. Gregory had been playing a dangerous game, and now she had the upper hand. But the question was, what would she do with this information? There was no going back now. If Aisha exposed Gregory, she could destroy him. She had the evidence to do it. But there were risks involved. It would be a huge confrontation, one that could shake the entire office. If she was wrong, if she acted too soon, it could backfire. The stakes were higher than ever. But before she could decide her next move, her phone buzzed again. It was an email notification from her boss, the CEO. She hesitated before opening it, her mind still reeling from the discovery. What could this be about? She clicked on the email, and her heart sank as she read the subject line. Urgent. Meeting with Gregory to discuss leadership changes. Aisha's stomach churned. She had been expecting a challenge, but this was a step beyond. Gregory was moving quickly. He was making his move, and he wasn't going to stop until he had everything he wanted. The email's content was blunt. It stated that a special meeting had been scheduled to discuss changes in leadership, and that Gregory would be there to present his concerns about the direction of the company. His concerns. Aisha's mind raced as she realized what was happening. Gregory was trying to spin the narrative. He was going to tell the CEO that she was unfit for the job, that she couldn't handle the pressure, that she was unqualified. This was his last play, his attempt to take her down before she could expose him. The trap was closing, and Aisha was standing in the middle of it. She didn't know how she was going to win this battle, but one thing was certain: she couldn't back down. Not now, not when everything she had worked for was hanging in the balance. She stood up from her desk, her mind made up. The clock was ticking, and the next few hours would be the most important of her career. The final confrontation was coming, and she had to be ready. The meeting with the CEO was scheduled for late afternoon. Aisha had spent the entire day preparing, reviewing the evidence she had gathered, and trying to calm the chaos brewing in her mind. She had to walk into that room strong, confident, and prepared. She couldn't afford to show any weakness, not with Gregory already positioning himself as the reliable, experienced leader the company needed. If she showed even the slightest crack in her armor, she knew Gregory would use it to take her down. As she entered the CEO's office, her heart pounded. The room was tense, too quiet. Gregory was already there, sitting across from the CEO, his posture relaxed, his eyes glinting with the smugness of someone who felt he had already won. Aisha took a deep breath and walked forward, sitting at the far end of the large conference table, her eyes locked on the CEO. "I trust everyone's familiar with the issues at hand," the CEO said, his voice neutral but firm. He glanced between Aisha and Gregory, clearly trying to gauge the atmosphere. Gregory wasted no time. "As I mentioned in my previous emails, there have been growing concerns about Aisha's leadership and ability to handle the responsibilities of the position. The technical issue during the presentation was only the latest in a series of challenges that have made it clear." He paused, glancing at Aisha with a feigned sense of sympathy, that she's simply not ready for this role. Aisha's stomach churned, but she kept her face neutral. She knew what was coming next. Gregory had already planted the seeds of doubt in the CEO's mind. But now, it was her turn. She couldn't let him control the narrative any longer. "I understand your concerns, Gregory," Aisha said, her voice steady, but every word was carefully chosen. "But what you're not telling anyone is that the technical issue wasn't an accident. In fact, I have proof that someone deliberately sabotaged the presentation software." Aisha could see Gregory tense up out of the corner of her eye, but she didn't break her gaze. "I've reviewed the system logs. Someone logged in remotely and tampered with the program just minutes before I was set to present. And I'm certain that it wasn't me." The CEO raised an eyebrow. "And who would have had access to do something like that?" Aisha slid a folder across the table, filled with the evidence she had uncovered. "I don't have proof of who exactly, but based on the logs, it's clear that the unauthorized access came from someone with significant knowledge of the system. Someone who would have known the exact time of my presentation and what needed to be altered to create a disruption." The CEO's expression shifted slightly, but he didn't say anything. Gregory shifted in his seat, his earlier confidence slipping just a fraction. Aisha's heart was racing, but she pressed on. "But that's not all," she continued. "This sabotage wasn't just about the presentation. It's part of a larger pattern. Gregory has been spreading rumors about me for months. He's been undermining my authority, making people question my qualifications. And I've been letting him get away with it, because I believed that my work would speak for itself." She turned to Gregory now, her voice rising with a controlled intensity. "But I'm done letting you control the story. You've been playing a dangerous game, Gregory. And it's time for the truth to come out." Gregory's face had gone white, and for the first time, his confident facade was cracking. "You don't know what you're talking about, Aisha," he said, his voice low, but there was a tremor in it. "You're just trying to shift the blame." "No, Gregory," Aisha replied, her voice now firm and resolute. "I'm not shifting blame. I'm finally standing up for myself. And for everyone else who's been too afraid to speak out." The CEO's eyes flicked between the two of them, his expression unreadable. "Gregory," he said, his voice heavy with authority, Do you have anything to say in response to these accusations? Gregory hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. This is ridiculous, he muttered, clearly trying to regain his composure. You can't honestly believe. I believe the evidence speaks for itself, the CEO interrupted, his voice colder now. I'll be reviewing this with our. We'll take the necessary steps to look into it. The tension in the room was palpable as Aisha waited for the CEO to make his final judgment. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Had she done enough? Was this going to be the end of Gregory's reign, or was he going to somehow twist the story back in his favor? A few long, agonizing minutes passed before the CEO finally spoke again. Aisha, I'm going to trust your findings. This isn't just about one mistake or another. It's about integrity. And it seems to me that Gregory's actions have crossed a line. Gregory's face turned ashen. He opened his mouth to protest, but no words came out. The CEO stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. I expect you both in my office tomorrow morning to discuss the next steps. For now, Gregory, please leave us. Gregory shot Aisha one last, venomous look before standing up and storming out of the room, leaving the door to swing closed behind him with a loud thud. For a moment, neither Aisha nor the CEO spoke. Then, the CEO turned to her, his tone softer but still firm. Aisha, you've handled this well. But this is far from over. The company's reputation is at stake. We'll need to move quickly. Aisha nodded, the weight of the battle starting to sink in. This wasn't a victory yet, it was just the beginning of a much bigger fight. As she walked out of the CEO's office, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She had just exposed Gregory for what he was, a manipulative, deceitful liar. And yet, the unease gnawing at her didn't fade. She knew the war wasn't over. It was just a new chapter. A few days later, as Aisha sat at her desk, finishing up some reports, she received a cryptic email with no subject line. She opened it and found a single line of text. Asterisk. You've won this battle, but the war is far from over. Watch your back, asterisk. Aisha's blood ran cold. She looked around the office, the once familiar space now feeling like a minefield. Gregory might have been taken down, for now, but she knew deep down that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something much bigger. And she was in the middle of it, with no way of knowing who would strike next. The suspense hung thick in the air as Aisha sat back in her chair, staring at the screen. Whatever came next, she was ready. She had learned how to fight. And now, she wasn't going down without a fight. The days following the meeting with the CEO were a whirlwind for Aisha. She had expected a moment of relief after Gregory's downfall, but instead, there was an eerie calm hanging in the air. It felt like a storm had passed, but there was no telling when the next one would arrive. Gregory was officially removed from his position, and his actions were being investigated by the company's HR department. Aisha knew it was a major victory, but it didn't feel like a clear-cut win. The anonymous email warning her that the war wasn't over still lingered in her mind. Who had sent it? Was it someone still loyal to Gregory, or was it a reminder that the corporate world wasn't done with its games? The uncertainty made her uneasy, but she couldn't afford to dwell on it for too long. She had a job to do. The weeks that followed were filled with long hours and a relentless focus on the projects at hand. The company, despite its recent internal turmoil, had big plans. Aisha was placed in charge of several key initiatives, her responsibilities growing as the leadership team began to trust her more. It was an incredible opportunity, one she had worked hard for. But the weight of everything that had happened still rested heavily on her shoulders. Gregory's betrayal had opened her eyes to how ruthless the corporate world could be, and she knew she had to stay vigilant. During one of her late-night strategy sessions, Lena stopped by her office. "You okay?" she asked, her voice gentle as she leaned against the doorframe. Aisha smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm fine. Just processing everything. It's hard to shake the feeling that there's more going on." Lena nodded. "Yeah, I get that. But listen, what you did was huge. You didn't just take down Gregory. You stood up for yourself, for everyone who felt like they didn't have a voice. That's not something you should brush off." Aisha exhaled slowly, trying to find the right words. "I know. It feels like a victory, but it just doesn't feel over. I keep thinking about that email. I can't shake the feeling that there's more to come." Lena looked at her thoughtfully. "You're right to be cautious. But you've proven yourself, Aisha. No one can take that away from you. You have the power now. You're in control. And whatever comes next, I know you'll handle it. Aisha didn't know if Lena was trying to comfort her or if she truly believed it, but the words hit her differently than she expected. There was power in standing up for herself. There was strength in resilience, and she had shown both in the face of adversity. Maybe it wasn't just about taking down Gregory, it was about proving to herself that she could rise above the challenges, no matter how unexpected they were. As the months went by, Aisha's leadership continued to shine. The projects she led flourished, and her reputation within the company grew stronger with each passing day. She had gained the trust of her team, and even the CEO had begun to rely on her insight and decisions. It wasn't the smooth ride she had hoped for, but it was real. It was hers. One afternoon, a year after the sabotage, Aisha sat at her desk, reviewing the latest round of project updates, when an unexpected knock echoed through her office door. She looked up, surprised to see the CEO standing in the doorway. "Aisha," he said, his voice carrying a weight she hadn't expected. "Do you have a moment?" "Of course, come in," she said, standing to greet him. The CEO entered and took a seat across from her, his expression serious. "I wanted to personally thank you for your dedication over the past year. The projects you've overseen have exceeded expectations, and the company is in a much stronger position because of your leadership." Aisha felt a sense of pride swell in her chest. It had been a difficult year, filled with unexpected challenges, but hearing this made it feel worth it. "But that's not why I'm here," the CEO continued, his gaze meeting hers. "I've been watching closely, Aisha. Not just your work, but the way you've handled the pressure, the setbacks. I want to offer you a new opportunity." Aisha's heart skipped a beat. She had heard rumors of a potential promotion, but hearing it from the CEO himself made it real. "What kind of opportunity?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "We've been talking about restructuring the leadership team. There's a senior position opening up, and I believe you're the right person to step into it. You've earned it." Aisha blinked, her mind racing. This was it, the culmination of everything she had worked for. It was an offer she hadn't seen coming, and yet, it felt like the natural next step in her journey. I'm honored. Thank you." The CEO nodded. "You've earned it, Aisha. But this comes with great responsibility. It's not just about managing people, it's about leading them. And I'm confident you're ready." As the conversation wrapped up and the CEO left her office, Aisha sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. The promotion was more than just a recognition of her hard work. It was a new chapter in her life, one where she could define her own path. She had fought for this moment, and now it was hers. But even as she allowed herself a BRIEF moment of triumph, Aisha knew the journey wasn't over. There would always be challenges ahead, more hurdles to overcome, more obstacles to face. But for the first time in a long time, she felt ready. She had learned that no matter how deep the betrayal or how daunting the obstacles, she could rise above it. And that knowledge, of her own strength, her own resilience, was the true victory. As Aisha stood up from her desk and looked out the window, she saw the city skyline stretching before her. It was a reminder of everything she had achieved, and everything still to come. She had started as just another employee in a competitive world, but now, she was a leader, someone who had earned her place at the top. And as the sun set, casting its golden glow across the office, Aisha couldn't help but feel that, for the first time in her life, the future was hers to shape.